All right. I got it.
You got it? Nice work.
It's a different link.
Whose office are you in now? Yeah. Good. Good. Glad to see you over there. Oh, the real one. I would prefer it. Sir. Yeah. Ever. It's going to one day. How are you?
So you think we're good?
Yeah. Yep, we're good.
Sweet.
So I'm just gonna update those who asked me about it.
Is there a new link or something?
Yeah, it's a new link, unfortunately. I had to go.
Well,
back
good thing we
separately.
didn't tweet yet.
Yeah. So I'm going to.
Just put the, can you just blast the correct, let's put a updated maybe advisory back out.
Yeah, I can do that.
Just do a subject line, all caps, updated, new link. Or all caps, updated, new or updated link for streaming or some shit like that.
Yeah, good guy. I met him like maybe 4 years ago. I know. I didn't know you know he's Cuban American. No.
I'm gonna just respond to this email.
Okay.
Ryan, yeah. I'm sorry. There's gonna be some folks who are credentialed here. Watch the confusion. Please use this link.
And what's the subject line?
It is updated.
Updated all caps, new link or new streaming.
New link for streaming Florida Delegation lead meeting. Okay. All right. Great. Goodbye. Okay.
That's off.
It's off.
Nice work. Take it. Good.
All right. It looks good, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Thank you.
Savannah, maybe just one of them kind of casually chatting before it starts. Without the staffer. Thank you, Bob. It's almost embarrassing to take it down.
Should we just standardize them so that like it hangs over the edges kind of nicely, like?
Yeah, maybe you can do that. Let me poke around.
Yeah.
There's like wires or something.
I don't know what I called her, but she
I'd like to welcome everybody here today for bipartisan congressional delegation meeting. While the delegation won't be the same without him, I know we'll be pleased to pass the torch to his friend Debbie and my friend take over as the new co-chair of the delegation. I look forward to having the same great working relationship. We're honored to be joined by issues affecting Florida, and this should result in a good discussion about a wide variety of Michael Cosby, President and CEO of Molten Marine Laboratories and Aquarium in Sarasota. We've had a long working relationship. I've been on that board as vice chairman in the past. And finally, Wesley Brook, the director of federal affairs for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I want to thank the panelists for being here today and leading both your time and expertise on these important matters. As my co-chair already noted, water quality issues are critical to our home state, affecting every aspect of the economy, from tourism to agriculture and even native wildlife like our Florida manatees. One issue I'm particularly focused on that affects us is in our area, red tide, which has placed havoc on marine life, our water quality, many businesses that rely on Florida tourism-based economy. Just as problematic are the algae bloom found in freshwater environments across the state. While these might not directly impact Florida beaches and coastal communities, they are no less problematic and cause issues for everyone residing in the vicinities of these blooms. That is why we must come together to find solutions to clean up our state waterways and protect them from future generations. Another issue I'm very concerned about, and I think all the delegation is, offshore drilling. We all remember the horrors of Deepwater Horizon in 2010, and frankly, when I came here originally, they wanted to do drilling off the shore like Sarasota or the West Coast 3 miles out. So I think we've had that discussion, but in 2010 they spewed more than 4 million barrels of oil in the Gulf of Mexico, claiming the lives of 11 workers, decimating the regionally economic. Additionally, I just wanted to mention in terms of water quality.
My question is of aware that. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm jumping right into questions. Probably about you.
In the central and southern Everglades, south of Lake Okeechobee, we continue to remove barriers to flow and achieve a more natural quality, quantity, timing, and distribution of flows to the Everglades National Park. We continue to make progress in our construction of the SEP South features and are currently building 3 additional large gated structures across the L67A levee. SEP South stands on the shoulders of incredible progress made by the bridges that have been built across the Taniani Trail and our implementation of the combined operations plan. We have already sent 1 million acre-feet of water across the Taniani Trail this year, with 2 more months of flows remaining in the year. If our current projections hold true, we are on track to have the 3rd highest volume flow south under the Taniani Trail in the last decade. So even in a year with normal rainfall, the combined operating plan is performing as expected, and this year will actually increase the flows to the Everglades National Park. With pending completion of the Herbert Hoover Dike repairs along Lake Okeechobee, which are scheduled for December of 2022, we have moved into the process since 2019 of writing or working. Lonesome is just a waypoint. We continue to need the additional flexibility that will come through water storage and the infrastructure in the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan.
Years seated in Mass, Congress, to represent the Florida Department of Environmental Protection on behalf of Secretary Sean Hamilton. DEP is committed to protecting our state's water resources that are the backbone of our state's environment and economy. Under Governor DeSantis' leadership, the department has worked diligently over the last 3 years to fully implement this Executive Order 1912, achieving more now for Florida's environment. Bold solutions aimed at pivoting the state's environmental policy, strong funding provided by the Florida legislature to enhance the governor's historic request of $2.5 billion in water quality investments and Everglades restoration investments over his first term. With your support here in Congress, together we are establishing a record of transformative progress on Florida's most pressing environmental issues. Guided by Governor DeSantis' vision, DEP is uniquely suited to help lead Florida through this new decade of opportunity that awaits us and position our state as a national and global leader on environmental protection, resilience, and sustainable economic growth and development. Thank you.
you very much, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Mesmer?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, members of the Florida delegation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the Sunshine State and offshore drilling. My name is Michael Mesmer, and I'm the Federal Policy Manager for Oceana's campaign against the expansion of offshore drilling. I'm happy to be among friends today, and I'm fortunate to be working on an issue where there is strong bipartisan unity. As you know, over 6,000 Florida businesses are committed to protecting their coastal economy from offshore drilling. In 2018, 68% of Florida voters supported a constitutional revision to ban drilling in state waters. 100 Florida municipalities formally opposing new offshore drilling that would put coastal communities at risk of toxic oil spills. But this is not just an environmental issue for Florida, it's also vital to our national security and DOE activities. Finally, of course, Governor DeSantis and this congressional delegation have also demonstrated their opposition. Floridians are united on this issue. The unity of the Florida delegation was best on display in 2019 when the House voted 3 separate times in bipartisan fashion to protect our coasts from new offshore drilling. And of course, President Trump's strong executive action will protect Florida for now, but Congress must secure a permanent ban on new offshore drilling for Florida. We strongly urge the Florida delegation to remain united and should vote on permanent protections coming from the House. While I'm not a native Floridian, every vacation of my childhood was spent there. Florida and its coast remain important to me, and I want to thank you all for everything that you do to protect them, and I look forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mesmer. Appreciate all of your important presentations. I'm just going to ask a quick question, and then I'll turn it over. Mr. Dunn, you'll be up first. Colonel Booth, I'm sure you're aware that we're currently working on a major bipartisan infrastructure bill that would provide funding to the Army Corps. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as passed by the Senate, includes $11.6 billion for core construction and $1.9 billion for aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. We've not yet enacted this legislation, but I expect that we will. Has the Corps begun discussions on how you might allocate this funding? And can we have your assurance that Jacksonville will prioritize Everglades in these agency discussions?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. I can't speak to detailed discussions that have gone on to headquarters as all the discussions on pending legislation have been ongoing. I do believe that the Corps of Engineers certainly expects to provide significant funding. If funds are provided in ecosystem restoration or aquatic ecosystem restoration, that a significant amount of that would go towards Everglades restoration. I can't speak any more to it. I think our history over the last few years, particularly the FY22 President's Budget allocation, if I remember correctly, 80% of the funding for aquatic ecosystem restoration was targeted towards Everglades restoration. I don't significantly think that would change with future funding.
Okay, so we've been informed by Corps headquarters that the agency has the ability to execute $5 billion. This is really important because we have been working, Bart and I have been working on this together. Our whole delegation is united. We know the Corps can execute $5 billion over 5 years for South Florida ecosystem restoration. And that's your understanding as well, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Okay. Now, the funding for Everglades restoration from the President's budget, $350 million, was significant, historic, but we would have to appropriate over $1 billion for the South Florida ecosystem restoration plan in FY23 in order to comply with the integrated delivery schedule. We can ideally take the 80% of what we take for Everglades restoration off the appropriations, the pressure off the appropriations process, if we make, and this is the last thing I'll say, that Jacksonville, I hope, is going to be making sure that you communicate what this is, so that we can make sure that we even up the 50-50 partnership that the federal government was supposed to be when it comes to Everglades restoration, and through both parties' presidents has not been. Is that something we can count on Jacksonville to communicate?
Ma'am, you can always count on Jacksonville District to communicate the importance of Everglades restoration and continue to get these projects in the ground.
Okay, well,
absolutely.
Let us know if you need our help. So thank you
Yes,
very
ma'am.
much.
Thank you.
Congressman Beck.
appreciate it. I just wanted to let the members particularly know, but also ask for our witnesses' insights, that Senator Rubio and I have reintroduced modernization adjustment of the state water revolving fund allotment. That formula pushes out clean water money out to the states, and it hasn't been updated since 1986. Florida is receiving about a third of what it should. It is consistently ranked in the top 5 in terms of needs, and in the bottom 5 in terms of allotment. So I would encourage, last Congress, we made a push on this, and then nearly the entire delegation got on. We'll be reaching out and would love to have everybody on again, as this will hopefully make it into the word of reauthorization off, and importantly, dues. Very popular with our municipalities who can use these. Welcome Florida getting its fair share. This go around with the overall in kind of classic DC fashion, we'll just have the states that deserve more will win, and everyone else should basically stay the same for states that have lost population over the last 3 decades. But can you speak to SRF and how that's integral to your work?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman, for your efforts on the Clean Water Allotment Modernization Act. It's a priority for DEP. DEP is the state agency that oversees the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loans that Congressman Walsh is talking about, for cost financing opportunities to many of the communities in your district, so that they can modernize their stormwater systems, their sewer systems. Septic to sewer conversions are another thing that gets funded there. And just to put a point on what the Congressman said about the formula, Florida now has more people living in the state than New York State does, but New York gets more than twice the amount in the Clean Water SRF program each year than the state of Florida does. The Congressman's bill goes a long way to fixing those issues as far as the formula goes, but it will also provide a lot of additional financing opportunity for the state and infrastructure. So, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We got 5 appropriators. We gotta get to work on that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, right. Congresswoman Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see you, Dr. Cosby. I'm also a big, I've been really focused on water quality issues, having worked on advancing legislation around harmful algae blooms, and then around the manatee deaths. Whenever I work with these issues, it always comes back to, or a key element of this is the seagrass beds. And so I had a team retreat in the district, and we actually went out to Mike's district to kind of take a look at the Indian River Lagoon, because all of those waterways connect. And we're exploring different efforts to try to restore the waterway and the grass beds. And so I'm just curious, and some of them were private things, and people trying to have more filters, people who are out there trying to actually plant seagrass. I'm curious, Dr. Crosby, what are effective ways for us to try to not only prevent the pollutants that go in that would create the blue-green algae, manage manatee population, but also directly affect the seagrass beds?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Representative, and all of your support over the years with issues related to coastal pollutants and harmful algal blooms. As I suggested in my opening comments, one of the areas that the state of Florida, and quite frankly the United States in general, really hasn't done a great job at is launching really science-based aquaculture with an aim of we don't have that yet. That have the capability centers around around the state strategically placed to deal with these issues. The Congressman's question a moment ago about the ranking the ocean, the longest coastline of any of the states in the United States, with the exception of Alaska. And so we really do have a desperate need to provide resources to deal with these point source and non-point source pollution so we don't initiate the trophic cascade that leads to the unusual mortality event with manatees. But more importantly, we've got to get ahead of the curve in terms of our state's ability to go out there and restore seagrasses so that we don't have this starting to perpetuate all around the coastline of Florida.
And just to the chairwoman's comment that there are 5 creators, I hope we can work together on this issue. And then just a question for Mr. Mesmer. You know, one of the key pieces about the pressure that's being put on our waterways is related to development. And a lot of the development is based off of the 100-year floodplains and navigable waterways maps. A lot of the city councils look towards those maps as to determining what their 5 and 10-year plan is and what is developable, to what level you can develop certain pieces of land. The last time I got engaged in that at the city level was a little while ago, but the maps were quite old and don't reflect the changing water footprint, I guess, in Florida. What, actually, I'm sorry, this question was for Mr. Brooks. What is the FDP doing about updating those maps? Because that sits at the heart of how we do community planning and how much pressure we put onto our waterways.
Sure. I appreciate the question, Congresswoman. You know, the state is very deeply engaged in trying to promote resilience of our coastal communities, and as you mentioned, it's a huge issue going forward. It's where most of the state's population growth has occurred in the past and where it continues to occur. One of the first things the governor did when he came into office with his executive order, Achieving More Now for Florida's Environment, was to reorganize DEP, including setting up the Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection. That office is really the one focused on working directly with communities throughout our state to make sure that they understand the risks present from coastal flooding and ultimately sea level rise. So we are making headway there. The governor recently announced the Resilient Florida Grant Program, whereby the state is going to be providing $500 million in grants to local communities to help promote their resilience, especially to coastal flooding. And part of that grant allocation is reserved for communities to make their own plans. And we are going to ensure that each county has a plan in place for dealing with coastal flooding in the future. So I think those issues are being addressed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much. Congressman Ness?
Thank you. I appreciate you all taking the time to come and speak with us and testify before us. I took the liberty of bringing some water out of Lake Okeechobee, as I quite often do, those green mason jars that you see in front of you. Measured 895 parts per billion poison microsystem. And to put into perspective how that affects north, south, east, west around our state, for representatives like Greg Stubbe, that's a primary drinking water supply source for his community. You look south to where Alcee Hastings, God rest his soul, was representing. That was covering entire marinas, not usable, impassable for people that work for the Corps of Engineers, surrounded by hundreds of acres of it on a daily basis, working on the locks and dams, breathing it in for 8-10 hours a day. The communities to the east and west on Florida's coast, south of Caloosahatchee on the west coast, and the St. Lucie on the east coast, receiving discharges of that, in certain times of year onto our coast, which doesn't just affect the freshwater areas, it also affects the saltwater areas. We have videos of the Atlantic Ocean breaking as green as those mason jars, the waves breaking as green as those mason jars because of the fresh water flowing into the Atlantic and turning the Atlantic Ocean into green algal blooms. It affects so much, and to go beyond that, representatives like Ms. Wasserman Schultz and my colleagues in Miami, the rest of my colleagues in Miami, their drinking water supply, West Palm Beach's drinking water supply. Everybody is affected by that. And my comment is simply this, and if you all want to comment something more on it, I appreciate it. As a delegation, bipartisanly, as everybody that's working within the state of Florida, it is all hands on deck for everybody's interest to find a way to clean that up. And to offer my opinion on this, it doesn't look like that because Lake Okeechobee is 6 inches too high or 6 inches too low. That's not why the lake is toxic. It's toxic because of the years and years and years of nutrients that are still flowing into that lake right in this very moment. And if we don't stop that, the drinking water for everybody on all sides of it, the seagrass for everybody on all sides of it, the bass fisheries in there, everything is going to be destroyed by that lake turning into what is in those mason jars that we see in front of us. So I don't have a question on that. Often ends up in my crosshairs. You can't fix that. I would give that to you. You can't fix that water's green. It's on the state of Florida. It's on us that represent the state of Florida federally and in the state house and the state senate and everywhere else to say we're not going to let what feeds that go into those waterways. And until we do that, we're going to keep dealing with that year after year after year. I will offer one other question peripheral to this, and it's Colonel this. We've seen the costs of construction inputs go through the roof. Anybody that's tried to build something, building process, cost of labor shortages, moving dirt, getting excavators out there, you name it. How's that affecting the Corps of Engineers' ability to get those projects brought online?
Congressman Mass, thank you for the question, and I will speak very broadly. But to answer your question first, when those costs go up, when we go out to contract for construction, obviously those costs on fuel, materials, labor increases are going to increase the cost of that contract. Significant increases over the last few years. And so what we see then is when we may have come to Congress and said the program amount, project amount is $100 million. Well, that cost when we get up to contracting now and doing the actual updated cost estimates could be $150 million. And so we do our absolute best to find engineering solutions to that to make sure that the projects are still valid, hold those costs down. But we are seeing costs increase when we actually go to contract. And obviously anything else that we're doing in that process. That might be doing contracts for surveys, et cetera. Those costs increase. So our cost of doing business is significantly increasing. And I'll just address your comments on harmful algal blooms. Congressman Mass, thank you for your passion on this issue. And as you indicated, we do not have a direct authority to deal with water quality entering, exiting Lake Okeechobee. But we do consider it a critical piece of information and a consideration in how we operate the system. We certainly learned that over the last few years, just as everybody's fought through the issues of 2018. And so we're doing our absolute best, particularly in LOSUM, as we look at how we operate the system in the future, to make sure we consider what's going on in the lake before we're doing releases, or what's going on in the estuaries where we might be making releases in directions of. And so, and also appreciate Congress's support for funding on research and development. Our engineering and research center, ERDIC, has been looking at this, has done a test or tested proof of concept on a system that could remove algae. They tested it on Lake Okeechobee in 2020. And from that proof of concept, they're moving forward with an improved system, a larger system, almost like a tractor-trailer based system that they're hoping would have the capability to remove significant amounts. I think it's around 200 million gallons per day. And that would be the capacity to treat, remove this kind of material from something the size of a marina, a small canal, or a small lake. And so we remain committed to research and improving our scientific understanding where the Corps has authorities, and certainly our research and development centers would certainly be willing to engage on that when there's authority in the funding.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Mass. If I can just ask members to try to be sensitive to staying within 5 minutes on both sides of the aisle for your questions stated and leaving time for the answer of our guests.
Madam Chair, and I'll keep us on track time-wise then.
Sorry, Congresswoman Frankel. We're gonna haze you freshmen, so.
That's why I put my full name right underneath hers.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. I'll show appreciation that this is a bipartisan panel, that we all care about the water. So, and just to emphasize that, and I want especially to you, Colonel, that there are many members who are concerned about the Lawson process. Some are less vocal than others. I didn't bring any water with me today, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the concerns of some of the stakeholders that I represent. And just start by saying, to emphasize what Dr. Crosby said, which is, we want you to take a science-based approach to Lawson, not political. And the Corps is always assured us of that. I hope that will continue. And there is concern, as you probably know, Palm Beach County, the city of West Palm Beach, and Palm Beach have both a quality and a quantity issue in terms of what's coming out of Lake Okeechobee. The city of West Palm Beach is very concerned that Grassy Waters, which is the drinking water for West Palm Beach and Palm Beach County, was not properly considered in the Lawson process yet. And they have requested a delay in you issuing your report until that happens. The report was set, I believe, to be issued last week. And all of a sudden there was a 2-week delay. Now we're happy about the delay, but we don't understand why it was only a 2-week delay and not enough time to take into the concerns of some of the other stakeholders who feel that they have not had enough time to review the modeling information or to have it completed. So could you just tell us, what's the reason for the delay and why such a short delay?
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate the comments on science-based versus political, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. Ma'am, I gave very clear guidance to my team, our team, over the last couple of weeks, that any decision, any recommendation they give me, any decision we ultimately make as a federal agency will be science-based. We appreciate all the feedback, comments from the breadth of stakeholders, but our decision will be science-based, based on that information. So the most recent round of the process, we were optimizing a preferred alternative that was rolled out back in August 9th. We had planned we released the data and modeling information on the 13th of October, publicly available to make sure folks could review that. And we plan on the 26th to talk about what we saw in the data and get feedback from stakeholders, and then to make a final decision on how we would move forward on the 3rd of November. I thought at that time that would give us adequate time based on the lengthy process that we've gone through to this date. It became clear when we had the discussions on the 26th that many stakeholders had much more feedback on the conceptual or the models that we thought met our standards for where we wanted to go with Lawson. And from that feedback over that 24 to 48 hour period, a little bit of feedback from stakeholders before that said, hey, we like a little more time. It became clear to me that we needed more time to look at that and adequately consider that information. And so I asked the team, did they think they needed more time and how much time they needed? And they asked for 2 more weeks to look at the data and feedback. We're taking information up until Friday, already considering and looking at the information we've received. And we think that's adequate time now to look at that information as we do that final little bit of modifications to the plan.
Well, let me just say, I was mayor of the city during a drought, and we came days within having no water whatsoever. And the city relies on water from Lake Okeechobee, that is quality water from Lake Okeechobee, in order for us to actually live, survive, drink water. So I don't understand why the Wilson process did not take into account what would happen to Grassy Waters with the water level in Lake Okeechobee. I think you should do that. And then the second point is, are you taking into account, you said you're not in charge of quality, but does your modeling take into account the quality of the water?
So ma'am, on grassy waters, I just can't speak to that particular issue.
Colonel, if I can just ask you to keep your answer tight.
Yes, ma'am, we do consider water quality, we tried to consider it in the modeling, we had some problems with that, but we were also looking at considering it and how we operate the system, as I spoke to, what's in the lake before we do releases. So we are considering it in the plan that's to come, yes ma'am.
Okay, and just, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, please, would you go back, please check and see why grassy waters has not been considered in this, because I think that's a very important consideration and a very big omission if you haven't done that.
Yes ma'am, I will.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and forgive me, I'm gonna just ask members to keep it to 3 minutes, just so that we can make sure we get attention to those who have to leave at 9:30, which includes co-chair, so I'll call on him next.
Real quick, Dr. Kowalski, just talk a little bit about red tide, where we're at, the duration and intensity is a lot worse than it's been, I've seen in 30 years, especially mainly on the west coast, but also maybe algae bloom. And then, Mr. Brooks, just real quick, 3 minutes to let everybody in. I do want you to talk about where we're at, 200 million gallons per in Tampa Bay. That's very concerning, and it's had a big impact. So you can just give a 1 minute answer, minute and a half. I know it's not a minute and a half answer, but so we do the other members. What's a couple of things that you would suggest, Dr.
Yes, sir, I'll try to be as quick as I can. Number one, red tide's a naturally occurring event. It's never gonna go away. We gotta learn to live with it. We gotta use science to decrease the impacts to our environment, our economy, and our quality of life. As I mentioned, the state of Florida has really shown leadership in a very dedicated 6-year initiative of applied science and technology development. We already have over 20 partners from around the world that are developing. We have now over 12 technologies that we're testing to decrease the impacts, and they are applicable to other algal blooms in Lake Okeechobee, as well as Indian River Lagoon, all around the United States, and really all around the world. And what I would respectfully request of you all that represent us up here is, how about we get the federal government to step up and to also augment this funding for this initiative that is really a model for how we can use science to develop technologies to deal with harmful algal blooms all across the state of Florida.
Thanks, Doc. Mr. Brooks, I'm just curious, Piney Point is a huge issue, not just in my district, but across Tampa Bay. Where are we at quickly? What are we doing about it so this doesn't happen again, ideally?
Yes, sir, and thank you for that. As you know, our close coordination on Piney Points over the last several months since late March, we had a situation where the owner of the site reported an issue with the structural stability of the seepage wall, and DEP and the state acted as quickly as possible to ensure the safety of residents in the area. That meant providing, or that meant that HRK ended up discharging a large amount of water into the bay. We are currently in enforcement actions with HRK Holdings over that. We've also pushed through.
Let me just say, it's been building up there for a long time. Nobody's dealt with it. I think you've stepped up in the last year, but 10 years before that, it's been an ongoing challenge. I do want to just visit with you separately at some point where we just kind of talk about where we're at. We want to try to prevent that going forward, because it's a disaster for our region, and I say the whole Tampa Bay region. So let's talk about that further, and I yield back.
Yes, sir. I'll just say we are committed to closing that site fully.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congresswoman Castor.
Well, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you to the panel. I want to express my really despairing vision now for the excessive nutrients and pollution poured into our bays and waterways. And I share Congressman Buchanan's frustration with the state on Piney Point, because this did happen a decade ago, where they had the overflow and they had to take it out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and dump it. And HRK has a lot of responsibility here, but the state of Florida also should have closed this out. So, Mr. Brooks, welcome back to this side. How much, you know, the state of Florida sent billions of dollars through the American Rescue Plan back to the state. How much of that money has been devoted to environmental protection and restoration?
I can't give you the exact figures, ma'am, but it is a significant portion.
So that might be a good follow-up with Congressman Buchanan and I, and so we can get a handle on
My
that
pleasure.
as well. And Mr. Brooks, okay, the reducing the impacts of red tide, but they're, just like Congressman Murphy talked about seagrasses and Congressman Nass talked about the nutrient loading, there are some other very important recommendations that should be made on water quality for restoration of Tampa Bay and all of our bays and estuaries. So go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, as I began to mention earlier, I think there is a critical need to address the nutrient loading at its source and prevent it from ever getting into the coastal waters and our fresh waters as well. And that is going to take a rather significant investment in infrastructure that is going to deal with both non-point source and point source pollution. That then cuts the forcing function at the beginning of those trophic cascade models that ultimately lead to something like an unusual mortality event that we're seeing now in Indian Lake Lagoon with manatees. However, there are some algal bloom situations, and red tide is one of those, that you can take every single one of us in the state of Florida, move us out, and you're still going to have red tide.
Do you support the deep well injection of toxic wastewater that remains in Tampa Bay?
I would never support injection of toxic water.
And then for everyone, there is really good news on offshore oil drilling. All of us have been pretty devoted to this. And Mr. Mesmer, thank you for Oceana's help and support here. On page 852 of the Build Back Better bill, and thank you Darren Soto for helping me get this through the Natural Resources Committee. We are going to achieve what we've been working on for many, many years, and that's a permanent ban on drilling off of the coast of Florida. It may not be enough to get your votes on BPB, but it's something that we can all share and celebrate for our great state. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Congresswoman Castor, and really to the whole delegation for working on this. Just so we have extra insurance, we also have the same prohibitions in the appropriations bill. So we got the 6 ways from Sunday and trying to make sure that we don't have drilling off our coast. So it's been a team effort with the delegation. And just I think it's important to note, we do fund significantly algal bloom research in both the CJS appropriations bill as well as the HHS appropriations bill. So there is significant resources for algal bloom research, and we'll continue to make sure we support that. Congressman Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank the panel for being here this morning. And I'm going to follow up on my colleagues' comments about offshore drilling and seismic testing. Never forget seismic testing. You know, but I also want to suggest that we should try every way to codify. This delegation really came together well when President Trump was in office, and we stopped the 5 incidental harassment authorizations that were issued by Interior for the seismic testing off our coast in the South Atlantic. And that was significant. Then we followed up and we were able to get the executive order to ban it for 10 years. I want to codify that. If these, you know, I support obviously banning this, but what I don't want to do is call out those representatives that might feel like I do, that, you know, we need to look at this every 10 years, or you know, because things change, and we want to look at that. So I would encourage everyone on in the delegation to also support our different bills that are out there. I've got one out there right now, Protect Florida Act, which would codify basically the executive order so that somebody can't come in behind and just change it. with a pen and a cell phone. And so that would ban it for 10 years. I think we ought to support, this delegation should support every effort to ban drilling and seismic testing. So I would encourage everyone to get behind that effort. And then also I would mention, you know, probably 20 years ago, I had an opportunity to sit down with a futurist who talked about the state of Florida and our water. And he said 80% of the population is going to be below I-4. 80% of the potable water is north of I-4. And he was saying then we are set for a disaster. Now, I don't know if those percentages are still correct, but looking at these mason jars, that, you know, we have got to address this issue. And so I don't really have a question. I just want to make those comments about drilling and seismic testing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rutherford, and I couldn't agree with you more. We gotta cover all our bases. No matter what moves, we've gotta make sure that we either get a permanent ban, and we should fight for that, and make sure that we do everything we can to establish that, codify that.
Yeah.
If we can't, then we get the next best thing. So, thank you so much. Congressman Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm proud to say that the Restoring Resilient Reefs Act has passed the Natural Resources Committee. Thank you to all the delegation for being co-sponsors of that, as well as Senator Rubio in the Senate. This bill passed the Senate late last year, but got caught up in the end of the year mess. So we're queued up to potentially pass this out of the House and have strong support in the Senate. And I certainly appreciate Mr. Brooks and the governor's support of that and the work of FDEP in helping with that. It'd be great to hear from briefly Mr. Crosby and Mr. Messmer on the importance of authorizing the reef restoration and having state block grant funds for Florida to be able to work with nonprofits and others.
I would defer to my colleague because that's not, as I work solely on the offshore drilling campaign with Sheena, it's really an area of my expertise.
Sounds good, Mr. Crosby.
Yes, sir, and I can't thank you and your colleagues enough here in the House, as well as Senator Rubio and his colleagues in the Senate. The Restoring Resilient Reefs Act is something we've been supporting now for years. We've been helping and craft language there to make this a bill that will really have an impact as opposed to just more of the same old, same old. So really applaud you for that. It's absolutely vital. However, with the utmost respect, sir, the utmost respect, the Section 213 and 215 language that deals with guaranteeing a portion of the conservation grant funding going out to the Coral Reef Steward Partnerships, and in 215 allowing nonprofit marine research organizations to be eligible to qualify as a coral reef research center. Without that language in the bill, I'm sorry, sir, but I have serious doubts about the impact being what I think you originally intended this to be. So I would respectfully encourage that language, that specific language be there. It's important because the very I worked for 20 years in this town in agencies. I know the agencies, very great scientists, great people, but you've got to get the money out of the agencies and in the hands of the organizations that actually develop the technologies to restore these reefs, that actually go out and restore these reefs in partnerships in the communities. And with this language being removed, you're doing away with that ability.
So that was a compromise.
Yes, sir.
By request of friends across the aisle and working with FDEP. So I encourage you to chat with Mr. Brooks a little bit on that. And in addition, I just want to end by saying we have the Kissimmee River, Wild and Scenic River bill up in November. It's also bipartisan with Representative Buchanan and others. So I urge each member to take a look at that as we're trying to protect that in the Little Manatee River. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Soto, and thank you for your leadership. It's good to have you on the Natural Resources Committee for our state. Congressman Bilorakis.
Thank you very much. I'll be as brief as possibly can. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to those who are testifying this morning. We addressed the Piney Point issue. And then if you want to elaborate a little bit on research and or best practices for prevention and mitigation of harmful algae bloom, whoever would like to elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it. And then I have one more question.
So what I can tell you is that the state of Florida are spending unprecedented. Are also working diligently to build new infrastructure out east and west of the lake to ensure that we are appropriately managing water and nutrient loading that occurs there as well. As other members have said, it's been decades, right, building to this point. We are, like I said, we're working as diligently as possible on kind of correcting some of the old problems. It's going to take a little bit of time, but we are making real progress. And DEP in particular is committed to full transparency and full accountability, and that's why we developed the protectingfloridattogether.gov website, where anybody can look at water quality across the state pretty much real time from all of our water quality monitoring stations, as well as any direct collections they can make. So we're committed to getting this solved.
It is affecting our economy as well with the red tide on the West Coast, so I appreciate it. Should be a priority. Colonel, with regard to the Inklow River dredging, I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with that?
No, sir, I apologize. I haven't had the chance to
Okay.
engage on that.
Well, we've been working on this for several years, and the dredging apparently is taking place now. Finally, after a few years, we've been pushing. But there is a second phase, and it has to do with the outskirts. This is affecting our seafood industry in the state of Florida. The fishing boats are having a hard time getting through to the ports. The water is extremely shallow in the port area. But the project, a second phase, could be done. We have the funding now from the city. We've gotten federal funding, and county funding, and we have the funding to complete the second phase, which is critical to our seafood industry. I was told initially by the Corps that we would not have to go through the rebidding process and go ahead and take care of that as soon as possible. Time is of the essence, there's no question. We don't want these restaurants continuing to get their seafood from China. This is Florida fresh seafood, Gulf seafood. So in any case, can you look into that for me? Because I received an answer, yes, we can complete the project, the second phase of the project, immediately, once we get the funding. And they said funding was an issue. Well, we have the funding now from the city of Tarpon Springs. But this affects the whole area, not just one particular city. Let's see if we can go ahead with it and finish it up on time, because it's very critical to our economy as far as I'm concerned. Thank you. If you could comment on that, fine. Otherwise, get back to me, please.
Very quickly, sir, Mr. Murphy just stepped up and let me know that our plan is to use a federal dredge to get after that if we get the funding. And so we'll just have to look into the status of that funding.
Please, I'd appreciate it very much. Get back to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bilorakis. And last but not least, the freshman who has gratefully avoided the hazing. We'll save it for next time, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Chairman. Just some comments and then just a couple of questions. One, I represent the southern Everglades and all the keys, and so for me, Everglades restoration is very important to myself and all the people who live in the area that I represent. The restoration of fresh flows through the Everglades into Florida Bay is vital to the health of Florida Bay and also the reefs. And I have to say, Dr. Cosby and the work that's done at Open Marine to restore the reefs is exemplary, and I've been witness to it, and just really, really cool what you're doing there with restoring the reefs and how fast you can restore the reefs with the work you've been doing, so thank you. So really simple question, and maybe you've answered this before, I walked in a little bit late. Everglades restoration, are we on time with the projects that are in the books?
Sir, a deep question. I think Everglades restoration timing is based on funding for the specific projects that come in. And so we do continually update our schedule, the integrated delivery schedule that I mentioned earlier. And as funding comes in, we execute what we can with the funding that is available. So it has delayed over years as funding is stretched out.
In order to complete the Everglades restoration projects, how much money is needed over what time, what period of time? I know you have a $5 billion kind of budget, right?
We've expressed the capability with $5 billion to take care of the projects, the authorized projects that we have on the integrated delivery schedule. If you look at a total for the total program, it is $200 billion. Federal is $10 billion. Non-Fed is 9.7. That answers your question, sir.
Say that again. 200 billion?
I'm sorry, I may have misspoke. 20 billion.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize. 10 billion, 10.9 billion federal, 9.7
We'll be in the
billion.
22nd century.
Okay, so you said 10 billion, approximately 10 billion in federal funds?
Yes, sir.
Okay, could you reduce the amount of federal funding if we front-loaded that?
Yes, sir. If we front load it, it does reduce the time to deliver, though our IDS does currently factor in ideal scheduling and funding, sir.
Okay, so if we accelerated, if we gave you more money quicker, would it reduce the cost at the end?
I don't believe so. At this time, if we do it perfect, it's that number that I said. As funding stretches out, takes more time, takes more money, sir.
Fair enough. Thank you. We'll go back. Thank you.
May I address some questions as well, Congressman?
Yeah.
So funding is certainly.
No, I don't want you to answer. No.
Funding can certainly be a constraint. Thank you all for everything that you've done to boost that funding over the last several years to match the state's commitments, and we're committed to doing more, and I hope you all will continue to fight to do more. But funding is not the only constraint on the program. Jacksonville District has been an excellent partner over the years. We have an incredible working relationship with them at DEP and at the South Florida Water Management District. But unfortunately, bureaucratic and regulatory hurdles with Corps headquarters has been a consistent thorn in our side getting this project done on time and under budget. I would just point out that you all have now authorized the EAA storage reservoir projects twice over the last two water bills because of Corps legalese and how they want to interpret statute that you all write and you all dictate to them. And right now we are having additional problems moving that project forward and also getting aspects of the Central Everglades planning project moving forward because of validation reports that Corps headquarters is holding up. So I would, and I'm happy to provide additional details with your offices, but if you would please continue to press Corps headquarters to move this program forward. They are the biggest impediment at this point.
I associate myself with the gentleman's remarks wholeheartedly. Fortunately, Mr. Middleton, I asked some questions related to, and was able to secure the confirmation that Congressman Diaz-Balart and I have worked on along with Congressman Rutherford, Frankel, and Chris on appropriations. The Corps has said that they can spend, they have the capacity and spend $5 billion over 5 years. The infrastructure bill that we're about to pass and send to the president has, I think, $11.3 billion, $11.6 billion for core construction, and $1.9 billion for aquatic ecosystem restoration projects. That as a delegation, we need to pressure, fight, insist. They have total discretion over where those funds go, and making sure that they allocate those funds so that we can make sure that we keep the Everglades restoration plan on the timeline that we're on now is essential. And what Mr. Brooks is referring to is that the Corps has interpreted that even though we have authorized projects that we have had that each individual project would need a new start, rather than the entire project being authorized, you know, essentially authorizing all the projects within it. Now, we put language in the appropriations bills to make sure that there was more clarity that that is not correct. But CORE is an interesting entity, and no matter what party holds the White House, they continue to be the most infuriating administration in the entire government. So it's going to require, and I say that with, I won't know what motion I say it with. I would usually say love and respect, but those are tough words right now when it comes to the CORE. So we just need to continue to work together in the bipartisan way we always do, and apply bipartisan pressure to make sure we can keep these projects on track.
Madam Chair, if I may, if a colloquy, is there something we can do about that? And in terms of the Corps' bureaucracy, because before I got here, it's legendary. And so I knew that there were some problems with the Corps, and it is legendary, the bureaucracy there. So what can we do about that bureaucracy to clear that up and expedite these things? Because time is money.
Absolutely.
Right, and time, and also the longer that we take, then the longer that our ecosystem suffers. And so how can we be of help?
Several different ways. Relentless full court pressure once the bipartisan infrastructure bill becomes law, to make sure that that $5 billion is allocated to the Everglades restoration projects, which, by the way, before you came in, I noted takes the necessity for us to eat up 80% of the program funding that Everglades restoration comes out of now, and frees up that funding for other water restoration projects behind us. So we should have the allyship of many of our colleagues who want to make sure that their water projects actually get funded. And then we can also use appropriations language, if necessary, in the FY22, FY23 appropriation process. So we just need to make sure that we're staying in constant communication so we can apply that relentless pressure and engage our authorizers as well as the appropriators. Thank you. Thank you for raising it. With that, I think we've reached the conclusion of our meeting. Thank you very much to each of our experts for joining us, for answering our questions, for your service. And for the delegation, look for an invitation before we adjourn for the year for a holiday reception that Congressman Buchanan and I will host. We should get together for some holiday cheer. And we'll be moving forward with reestablishing our quarterly meetings in person, and we'll try to keep the time frame a little tighter to be respectful of members' time. Thank you so much. Show us adjourned.